a riding horse that's quite wide. And now we're just going to turn the shoulders, trying to keep the hips stationary. So my legs are braced against the ground. They're holding my hips, and I'm turning my shoulders. What do you have to do with your legs to counter the tendency of the hips to come with the shoulders? I'm just trying to look at where my mind is. The mind tends to be with the head and the shoulders. I'm trying to get it down into the waist, hips area. What are my hips having to do to stop themselves from pulling with the shoulders? Effectively, my hips have to turn the other way a little bit, or feel as though they are. Feel the torque in the torso. And now bringing the feet up. And now just doing the opposite of that. So trying to keep the shoulders with the room and turning the hips. If it makes it easier, turn the head with the hips, but keep the shoulders and the arms where they are. A normal riding horse. And now turning everything. So from the hips. So maybe just place the hands on the hips and turn the whole torso with the head. Feel the turn. So turn to the side. The turn is in two parts. One, coming back to the front, and then two, turning the other side. Feel that point in the middle. It's like a little groove there where it slots in. You don't want to gloss over that too quickly. So I come back to the front and then I turn to the side. And now to riding horse. Now we want to feel the shoulders with the hips. I remember when I first started Tai Chi, one of the things that struck me about John's posture was just how sloping his shoulders were. I mean, they gradually got more tense as we did that figure of 8 form, but to start with, they were just right down. So this feeling that they're dropping into the hips. And now let's just tip. So just feel this shoulder and just imagine it's actually dropping down into this hip. And then I bring it up. You've got to see it. It's not just a mechanical doing this. Feel this shoulder melting, almost dripping, drooping down into the hip. So I'm trying my best not to tip my hips, my best to keep the 2 hips level, and just allowing that shoulder just to melt down. So I have to concentrate on this hip here, not letting it rise too much, and then just bring it up, and then the other side. So it's a relaxation. I'm allowing the shoulder just to droop down, and then I bring it back up, and then again this side. Shoulders are in the hips. So what we find in meditation is that if you're watching it, then when your mind starts wandering, the shoulders have come up just a little bit. It's as though for the mind to think to itself, it needs to create space inside your torso. So although the mind, in one sense, feels as though it's in the head, in another sense, it's like it's in here, sort of with the heart. And we need to create a little bit of empty, dead space for the mind to sort of resound within. Otherwise, it just can't start talking. So this feeling that shoulders are just packed down into your hips. So when you block out that space, you don't give the mind the opportunity to retreat into itself. Then you're very present. You're raring to go. You're raring to come out and engage with the world. Okay, now let's just bring the fists to the hips. And what we're going to do is just do this Kung Fu exercise. So I'm extending the fist forwards by turning myself this side. And then I pull that fist back. And then this way. So a sense that my hip is actually throwing my fist forwards. My hips are like missile launchers. So if I want my fist to fly forwards, I don't want it to come from strength in the arm. I want it to come from the legs. So for that, I need to use the hips. And my hip throws the fist out, and then it sucks the hip back in. So throws the fist out, sucks it in. 1, 2, 1, 2. And now let's just look at it. This is really important in Tai Chi. It's a bit like turning the waist. We know that we're meant to turn the waist to get the movements in the arms and the upper body. But often when you watch people working, you see really it's coming from their arms and their waist happens to be going along for the ride. So what we want is for the motor to be here. This is where it all starts. I want to feel these actually doing the job. This is throwing the fist out. So in order to do that, I don't want it to simply be a coordination between my hip and my fist. So it's not this. This is just both moving at the same time. So if I want this hip to be the real launcher of the fist, it has to pull back the other way a little bit first in order to gather some energy to do the throwing. It's like when if you're throwing a rock, you pick up a rock, you do this and then you throw it forwards. If you just picked it up and did that, it wouldn't go very far. It's the same here. So I turn a little bit to my right, and then I turn to the left to launch this fist, and then I suck it back. And now the other one, so I have to turn a little bit to the left, and then to the right, and then I suck it back. So a little bit to the right, then to the left, suck it back, a little bit to the left, then to the right, and then back. You can't go too slowly, otherwise it will just collapse. So there needs to be a certain amount of speed and energy just to keep the system with the right shape. So 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. And now just back. Again, shoulders really pulling down. So let's try just dropping the elbows. So if your shoulders are really relaxed, then your elbows will just sort of nestle into the hip joints, into the iliac crests. Like you've got a tray here, and your elbows are glued into your hips, and you're just offering the tray around. So it has to come from the hips now. It can't come from the shoulders, because the shoulders are no longer part of the system. So remember Chen Manqing saying he had his great insight when he had a dream that he was pushing hands, but he had no arms. So it's all having to come from the turning of his hips. It's a bit like that here. No, we've got no arms, effectively. It's all coming from the hips. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Feel the same principle that we had going on here, where we had to pull it back a little bit before we released it. Feel the same thing happening here, because that's happening everywhere. It's like little blips that makes what seems to be smooth actually like a stepped process, a digital process. So turning this way. Okay, now I want to turn back. So I go a little bit more that way, and then I turn back to the front. And now I want to turn to the left. So I turn a little bit to the right first, and then to the left. Now I want to turn right. So I turn a little bit to the left first, and then back to the front. And now I need to turn even more to the right. So I'll turn a little bit to the left, and then to the side. So it's always in these sort of staggered steps, which gives it that shimmery vibration. This tiny turn in the opposite direction, tiny turn to the right before I turn to the left, it's really just me catching the foot. So when I do this in order to punch forwards, I'm just making sure that I'm catching this foot so that I've got access to a source of power and energy. So without these little sort of hooky blips within our movements, they glide. They're not really connected to the ground properly. So let's try again. So I turn this way. And now I've got to turn this way. But again, just imagine it's really difficult, like you're in the pool. And so I really have to sink into this leg by turning even more to the right. And then I come round to the front. Now I don't have enough energy to go here now, so I have to do that again. Again, I sink down, turning to the right, and then I push to the left. And then here, 1, 2, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Back to riding horse. If you practice like this with the elbows into the hips for a time, then when you bring the elbows up into ward off, you can really feel the power of that, what it actually does for your energy. So this is what the Chinese call testing. So you sort of do the opposite of what you're meant to do, so that when you then do what you're meant to do, you feel what it's doing. Shoulders heavy, shoulders sinking down into the hips. So relative to my hips, my shoulders are dropping. So relative to my shoulders, my hips are rising. It's all relative motion. How is one thing moving in relation to its neighbor? And then I can have relative motion between my hips and the ground, or my feet, at the same time that I have relative motion here. In one sense, my hips are sinking relative to the ground, but in another sense, they're rising relative to the shoulders. And now let's try just working on the circles. Not our normal circles, not like the ward-offs and these, but the circles, the containing circles. So basically, there are 3 circles that we work with. There's my circle, the circle of which I am the center. So this would be this exercise. So let's just try, just bring the feet up a bit and just turning. Think of the spine being in the middle of the circle and just turning. So your 2 arms are inscribing pretty much a circle. It comes further out the front than it does the back because of the limitation of the articulation of our arms. Very much like I'm the center of the world and everything is swirling around me. And if you can, just try and get it coming from the hips. That's the motor. And if I want it coming from the hips, I have to work the way we were just working with these little blips first. So I'm going this way, and that digs me into this foot so I can come round the other way. Then here, this digs me into this foot. So my hips are moving from the ground, and my shoulders are moving from my hips. Back to riding horse again. So that's the obvious circle, the one of which I am pretty much the center. The other circle is the one that the other person is in, so the equivalent for them. So I want to be able to trace that as well. Otherwise, I can't really listen to them. So when we do this exercise of the two circles, this is basically what's happening here. I'm using my turning in order to make a circle around the space that's in front of me like this. So I'm just getting a simple forwards and backwards motion of the hip. And because of the way my arm is articulated, from my shoulder, the arm can move out this way, and it can also move in this way. But the elbow can only really bend this way. It can't really bend the other way. And the wrist can only really bend this way, can't really bend the other way too much. So because of that articulation, when I turn this way, this part of the arm will go out, but the forearm and the wrist will stay with the upper arm. And then this way will throw this around and it will come in because now it's bending at the elbow and the wrist. It will come in like this. So it's the same as when we were doing this, but now I'm just loosening the arm and just getting much more of a circle. So my arm goes forwards as the hip comes forwards, and it loops around the other person. And as it comes back in, it's folding from the elbow and the wrist, and that gives the impression of a circle. But basically, all the yielding actions in Tai Chi are just this motor. I'm using my hips to produce circles that contain the other person, but don't contain me. Remember, I was pushing hands with John once, and you know what he was like. It'd sort of be like this. And he'd very much be the powerful central figure. And then for some reason, he just said to me, okay, he says, I'm going to turn on Dr. Chi's energy now. And he just softened. And suddenly he was circling me. Instead of him being in the center and me having to be a satellite of him, there was a sense that he was flowing all around me. So this is the feeling here. You're getting behind the person. So you don't trespass into their territory. You contain them. So I can contain that person's circle within my ward off. So my mind has to be big enough here to reach around the back of them. And then my yielding needs to be skillful enough to be able to turn here without me pulling them on top of me. So the arms have to be very loosely articulated, especially the elbows and the shoulders. And then just back to riding horse. And now the third circle is the circle that contains both me and them. This is a bit like the circle of the yin and yang. You think of the yin-yang circle being big, and it's got these two circles contained that touch each other. One is me, one is them. So when I'm working with another person, I need this sense. I need a sense of my own circle. I need a sense of their circle, and I need a sense of the circle that connects and contains both of us. So this would be what John would call the circle of the third heart. So if you think you've got two people interacting, so I have a heart, the other person has a heart, and when we connect properly and work together, then that connection has a heart. So there's the third heart, which is the heart of the relationship. It's the same for, people you live with, friends. You have a third heart with all of them. So a sense that, you know what it's like if you haven't seen a good friend for years and then suddenly you meet them again. Within seconds, you take off from where you left off. So there's been a sense that the relationship has been developing, even though you've been absent from each other. So the relationship has a life of its own that's independent of your life and independent of their life. So here, what I have to do is reach behind. I'm not really going any further forwards than I was before when I was doing this circle like this. But I just have to make sure now that it's going to contain me. So I turn this way, and then I don't turn back too soon, because if I turn back too soon, the circle is just going to contain them. So I turn to the left, and then I continue turning to the left, and it's as though this arm is going to wrap around the back of me. But it can't. The arm can't, but the energy can in my mind. So I turn this way. I feel it slipping behind me, and then quickly I nip here, catch it here, and then send it forwards again. So just a real sense that you're at the back of this circle. They're at the back of the other side of the circle. I have to feel the circle continuing as I disconnect with my arm from it. Yeah, so it'd be nice if we could trace this whole circle with the hand, but this ability to keep the circle going as you break from it physically and then catch it again, an important skill. It's what they call slipping. So I slip off this circle and I catch it again here. And then let's try a bit with the other hand. So reach out and just continue turning. So the circle is trying to come here and come around the back of me like this. And then I catch it here and send it forwards again. And now let's just try this one again. So knocking the gates of life. But feeling as though we're making that circle, because the circle that contains both me and the other person contains me. It's just big enough to contain them as well. So I'm just doing this exercise, but really feeling my front hand reaching out and going behind something. It's not just tracing with me in the middle. I'm now right at the back of it, and this hand has to reach forwards. So the largeness is in your mind. The compassion is in the mind. My ability to put the other person first. Not be so self-centered. Feel when the centrifugal is this strong, it tends to bring you up out of your legs. So we have to really concentrate on sinking. I have to keep the system rooted. Okay. And then back to riding horse. And shoulders with the hips. That's really difficult. We don't realize it, but all the time, every opportunity we are promoting ourselves. We're creating a system that has our ego at the center. And that requires me to lift my shoulders just a little. When my shoulders are packed down into my hips, there's no space for me. I'm just a thing in the world. I'm here with the room. And it is difficult because it has a very different mood. It's got a really sort of ruthless, determined, almost stubborn mood that will not accept any sentiment, any sentimentality, any emotion. It's rich with feeling, but not an indulgent feeling. Let's just try just the first postures of the form, but with my arms coming from my hips. So just with my elbows on my hips. So everything's going to be small. Just think thalidomide. When I was a little kid, everywhere you went, literally every playground, there'd be someone there that had no arms or whatever. There'd be a thalidomide victim. And it always used to amaze me just how easily they got on. Remember one girl with no arms, just hands coming out of her shoulders, and she was climbing on the climbing frame, just like having no arms actually helped her. So just stepping out to the side. So I have to use my waist. I can't use my shoulders. So I use my waist to just circle the hand. And then here, again, the hands come up, but not very far. And then they come down again. And now here, I have to really use the hip. And then 1, 2, step. I have to use my hips, use my turning. Turning, pushing, turning. And now just feel, boy, freedom. I can lift my elbows. Loosen the hips a bit. And so it's sort of figure of 80, everything that you're just getting ripples in the spine, really. So for that ripple coming from the ground to pass across my sacrum and up the spine, my sacrum has to be very loose. The hips have to join the sacrum loosely. So the sacrum can sort of tip and turn and wobble and then